The man collapsed before anyone even realized what had happened. One moment he was laughing beside the champagne tower, his glass raised under the glow of imported Italian chandeliers. The next, his fingers loosened, crystal shattered against marble, and his body folded like something suddenly unplugged. Conversations froze mid-sentence. A violinist stopped playing. Someone screamed. I stepped forward instinctively, but my father's hand shot out, blocking me. "Don't," he said sharply, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "She's just a senior nurse. Someone call real medical staff." Across the room, a 4-star general turned slowly, his eyes locking onto me. And that was the moment my father's $3 million night began to fall apart. The party had already been in motion for nearly an hour when I arrived. My father believed in entrances, grand, carefully timed, engineered like everything else in his life. The estate overlooked the Pacific, perched high enough that the ocean looked less like water and more like polished metal reflecting the sunset. Valet lines stretched down the private drive. Security wore tailored black suits with discreet earpieces. A string quartet played near the infinity pool, their music blending with the muted murmur of wealth. Inside, everything gleamed. Champagne pyramids, imported orchids flown in that morning, waiters in white gloves circulating with silver trays. My father loved excess when it could be measured. Tonight he had repeated the number to anyone who would listen. $3 million. That was the cost of the evening, not including the vintage Bordeaux, not including the private chef flown in from Paris. He stood near the center of the room, surrounded by investors, politicians, and men who measured respect in net worth. He spotted me almost immediately. His smile didn't disappear, but it changed, tightened slightly, like he had just noticed something out of place. I had come straight from base. My uniform was pressed, the dark fabric sharp under the soft lighting. My hair was secured in a neat bun. The insignia on my shoulders caught the chandelier's reflection. I saw several guests glance at me with curiosity, some with quiet respect. My father stepped toward me before anyone else could speak. "You made it," he said, his tone warm but edged with something performative. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is my daughter." Several heads turned. Someone nodded politely. A woman smiled. My father gestured toward my uniform, chuckling lightly. "She's in the military," he added. "Well, technically, medical side." A few guests laughed softly, unsure how to respond. My father continued, his voice just loud enough. "Just a senior nurse, really. She doesn't like the family business, prefers service." He picked up a glass of champagne from a passing tray and handed it to me, not like a father offering a drink, but like a host assigning a task. "You can help the staff tonight," he said. "Keep busy." The words hung in the air, subtle, polite, humiliating. I felt the eyes around us, some uncomfortable, some curious. My father smiled as if he had just told a charming anecdote. I accepted the glass, "Of course," I said quietly. He nodded, already turning back to his guests. Conversation resumed. The quartet shifted to a softer piece. The moment dissolved as quickly as it had formed. I moved toward the edge of the room, setting the champagne untouched on a nearby table. The ocean breeze drifted in through the open glass doors. I watched the guests' men discussing acquisitions, women comparing charities, laughter that sounded practiced. My father thrived in rooms like this. Control, status, applause disguised as networking. He had always measured success differently than I did. When I joined the military, he treated it like a phase. When I chose medicine, he called it wasted potential. When I deployed for the first time, he sent a short email, "Stay safe. Come back when you're ready to do something real." I didn't argue anymore. I learned early that silence preserved dignity better than confrontation. A sudden shift in the room caught my attention. Security near the entrance straightened. Conversations softened. A tall man in dress blues stepped inside, his posture unmistakable. Even before I saw the stars on his shoulders, I recognized the bearing. A 4-star general. The energy changed immediately. My father turned surprised but delighted. He hurried forward, hand extended. "General, what an honor." The general shook his hand politely but briefly. His gaze moved past him, scanning the room. When his eyes landed on me, recognition flickered. He didn't approach. He simply gave a small nod, professional, controlled. My father didn't notice. He was already guiding the general toward a cluster of influential guests eager to capitalize on the moment. I watched quietly. The music resumed. The party regained its rhythm. Minutes later, I noticed the man near the champagne tower, mid-60s, expensive suit, laughing too loudly. He lifted his glass, his hand slightly unsteady. At first, it looked like nothing, just another wealthy guest drinking too quickly, but then his fingers tightened. His smile faltered. He swallowed hard. I shifted my focus. His breathing changed, shallow, uneven. He pressed a hand to his chest. Sweat appeared along his hairline. The conversation around him continued unaware. I stepped forward. My training took over, automatically scan, assess, move. But before I reached him, my father intercepted me. "It's handled," he murmured, misunderstanding completely. "Staff will take care of it." "He's not okay," I said quietly. My father gave a faint smile as if indulging me. "You don't need to play hero tonight." Behind him, the man's glass slipped from his hand. It shattered on marble. His knees buckled. And then he fell. The sound of glass shattering cut through the room sharper than the violin had minutes earlier. Conversation stopped mid-word. Someone gasped. A woman near the champagne tower instinctively stepped back, her heel slipping slightly on the polished marble. The man who had been laughing moments ago now lay on his side, one arm twisted beneath him, his face pale in a way that didn't belong in a room full of gold light and expensive perfume. For half a second, no one moved. Wealth often freezes before it reacts. People who are used to control don't always know what to do when control disappears. Then the noise began, overlapping voices, confusion, chairs scraping. "Oh my God, is he drunk? Call someone." I stepped forward immediately. My body had already shifted into assessment mode. Distance 8 feet, breathing unknown, skin tone rapidly losing color. I was moving before I consciously decided to. My father's hand caught my wrist. "Wait," he said, low but firm. "Staff will handle it." "He's not breathing right," I replied, keeping my voice calm. He tightened his grip slightly, not aggressive, just controlling. "You don't need to involve yourself. Someone's already calling emergency services." I looked past him. No one was actually helping. People formed a circle wide, cautious, almost theatrical. Phones appeared. A man crouched halfway, then hesitated, unsure. The fallen guest made a faint choking sound, then went still. "I need to check him," I said. My father leaned closer, smiling politely for the audience around us. "You'll create panic. Let professionals handle it." "I am a professional." He gave a soft laugh as though correcting a child. "You're medical support. That's different." I didn't answer. Instead, I gently but firmly removed my wrist from his hand and stepped around him. The air shifted as I entered the circle. Someone muttered, "Is she a doctor?" Another voice whispered, "Military." I dropped to one knee beside the man. "Sir, can you hear me?" No response. His eyes were half open but unfocused. His lips had begun to tint bluish. I tilted his head slightly, checking airway. His breathing was shallow, barely there. Pulse at the carotid, weak, irregular. "Call 911 now," I said loud enough for everyone nearby, "and find an AED." People looked at each other. No one moved immediately. My father stepped closer, his voice edged with tension. "Emergency services are already on the way." "That's not fast enough." The man's chest stopped moving. Everything narrowed into clarity. I repositioned him flat on his back. "Sir," I tapped his shoulder firmly. No response. Pulse gone. I interlocked my hands and began compressions. The first push echoed slightly against the marble floor. A few guests gasped. Someone backed into a table, glasses clinking. "What is she doing?" a woman whispered. "CPR," another replied quietly. My father stood above us, frozen between authority and uncertainty. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said without looking up. "He's in cardiac arrest." I counted silently. 1, 2, 3. Steady rhythm. My shoulders aligned over my hands. Each compression deep, controlled. Training replaced emotion. Noise faded. "Does anyone know where the AED is?" I called. A waiter hesitated. I think there's one near the kitchen." "Go now." He ran. The man's chest rose slightly between compressions. No spontaneous breathing, no movement. I continued. Sweat formed at my temples, but my hands stayed steady. Behind me, the room had gone quiet. The quartet had stopped entirely. Even the ocean seemed distant. I could feel eyes on me, dozens of them, but they no longer mattered. My father spoke again, softer this time. Ambulance should be here any minute. He doesn't have minutes. A figure moved closer from the crowd, the 4-star general. He didn't speak. He simply watched, his expression calm, evaluating. 30 compressions, I murmured, then tilted the man's head again, checking airway. No obstruction. I delivered 2 breaths, controlled, measured. His chest rose slightly. Back to compressions. The waiter returned, breathless, holding the AED. Here. Open it. He fumbled with the case. I took it, powering it on. The device began its calm, electronic instructions. Expose the chest, I said. Someone handed me a small pair of scissors from the kit. I cut through the expensive fabric carefully but quickly. The adhesive pads went on, one upper right, one lower left. Stand clear, the device announced. Everyone stepped back instinctively. The machine analyzed, the seconds stretched. Shock advised. I glanced around, clear. No one touched him. I pressed the button. His body jerked slightly. I immediately resumed compressions. 1, 2, 3. Steady. My breathing remained even. Focus, timing, pressure. My father's voice came quietly from above me. Is he working on it? The general folded his arms, still silent. His eyes never left my hands. After another cycle, the AED prompted again. Analyzing. I lifted my hands. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Shock advised. Clear. Second shock. The man's chest spasmed. A faint cough escaped his throat. Then another. I checked pulse there, weak but present. He's got a pulse, I said. A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone exhaled audibly. A woman covered her mouth. The man drew a shallow breath, then another. His eyelids fluttered. Sir, stay still, I said gently. Help is coming. The tension in the room released all at once, whispers, movement, disbelief. My father stepped closer, his expression shifting from control to something else. Something quieter. The general finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. Excellent compressions. I looked up, briefly nodding. Thank you, sir. My father blinked. He looked from me to the general and back again, as if the scene had rearranged itself without his permission. The ambulance sirens sounded faintly in the distance. But the real shift had already happened, and my father had just begun to realize he no longer understood the room he created. The sirens grew louder, echoing up the coastal road, but the tension in the room had already shifted into something quieter, heavier. Guests who had once stood with casual confidence now kept a respectful distance, as though the space around the man on the floor had transformed into something sacred. The orchestra remained silent. Glasses sat untouched. Conversations resumed only in whispers. I stayed beside him, monitoring his breathing. It was shallow but stable. His pulse, though weak, had strengthened slightly under my fingers. A waiter knelt nearby, holding a folded napkin, unsure whether to offer it or simply stay out of the way. I gestured subtly for him to step back. Sir, can you hear me? I asked again. His eyelids fluttered. A faint groan escaped his throat. He tried to move, but I placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Stay still. You collapsed. Help is on the way. He swallowed, confused. His gaze drifted past me, unfocused, then returned. What happened? You had a cardiac event. You're okay. Just breathe slowly. He nodded weakly. Behind me, I could feel my father's presence before I heard him. He wasn't speaking now. That alone was unusual. The man who had orchestrated every minute of the evening seemed suddenly unsure of where to stand. The 4-star general stepped closer, his posture relaxed but deliberate. He crouched slightly, observing the patient with practiced calm. Pulse, he asked quietly. Present, weak but improving. Good work. He said it simply, no flourish, no performance, just professional acknowledgement. My father cleared his throat. General, I didn't realize. The general didn't look at him. His attention remained on the man recovering on the floor. You're fortunate she was here. My father's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Paramedics entered moments later, moving with efficient urgency. One of them knelt opposite me. What do we have? Male, mid-60s. Sudden collapse. No pulse. 2 shocks delivered. Pulse restored. Breathing spontaneous but shallow. The paramedic nodded. Copy that. They took over smoothly, oxygen mask monitor leads, stretcher prepared. I stepped back, giving them space. My knees registered the hard marble for the first time. I rose, slowly rolling my shoulders once the adrenaline fading in controlled increments. The man reached out weakly as they lifted him. His hand brushed mine. You saved me, he murmured. You're going to be fine, I replied. He squeezed once before the paramedics guided him onto the stretcher. The crowd parted silently as they carried him toward the exit. The sirens softened, then faded again as the ambulance doors closed outside. The room remained still long after they left. Someone finally began clapping softly at first. Another joined, then a few more. It wasn't loud, it wasn't celebratory. It was restrained, respectful. I felt heat rise faintly in my face, not from embarrassment but from the weight of attention. I inclined my head slightly, then turned away. My father stepped closer. His expression had changed. The confidence that usually defined him had been replaced with something unfamiliar, uncertainty, maybe even discomfort. You handled that well, he said carefully. I did what anyone trained would do. He nodded, but the gesture felt incomplete. His eyes flicked briefly to the general who now stood beside us. The general studied me for a moment, then extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, measured. Still working trauma rotations, he asked. Yes, sir. I thought so. My father blinked again. He looked between us, trying to assemble context he clearly didn't have. You two know each other. The general finally turned toward him. Your daughter and I have crossed paths before. That's impressive, my father said, forcing a smile. She helps in medical units, very dedicated. The general's expression remained neutral. She does more than help. Silence followed. My father shifted slightly, his posture tightening. A few nearby guests pretended not to listen, though none moved away. One of the investors spoke quietly to another. She brought him back. I saw it, the other replied. Didn't hesitate. The whispers moved through the room like ripples. My father tried to regain footing. Well, I'm grateful she was here tonight. Very fortunate timing. The general looked at him steadily. Fortune had little to do with it. He paused, then added, competence did. The words landed gently, but their meaning carried weight. I glanced toward the ocean through the glass doors. The sun had nearly set, leaving a deep amber glow across the water. The music hadn't resumed. The party my father designed now felt like something paused, no longer celebratory, not yet over. He exhaled slowly. Would you like a drink? He asked me almost reflexively, as if returning to the earlier script. I shook my head. I'm fine. He nodded, then seemed unsure what to do with his hands. He adjusted his cuff, glanced around, then back at me. For the first time that evening, he looked at me not as an accessory to the event, but as someone he was trying to understand. The general's voice broke the silence again, calm and direct. You handled that exactly the way I expected. My father turned toward him. Expected. The general met his gaze. Yes. And in that single word, the ground beneath my father's certainty shifted again, quietly but unmistakably. My father studied the general's face, searching for context the way he usually searched for leverage. He had spent decades reading rooms, identifying influence, mapping alliances, measuring status in subtle cues. But this was different. The general's tone held no performance, no social maneuvering. It was simple recognition. That unsettled him more than anything else that had happened so far. Expected, my father repeated, his voice carefully neutral. The general inclined his head slightly. Yes, she's handled situations like that before. My father let out a quiet breath, as if absorbing something he hadn't planned for. Well, I suppose medical training prepares. She runs trauma operations, the general said calmly. The conversation around us seemed to thin like oxygen fading from the room. Several guests leaned subtly closer. My father blinked. I'm sorry. She runs trauma operations, the general repeated, still composed. Multiple deployments, combat zones, mass casualty environments. My father's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. He looked at me, then back at the general. I didn't realize she was that involved. I didn't speak. I had learned long ago that correcting my father publicly often made him defensive rather than receptive. Silence let the truth settle on its own. The general continued, not confrontational, just factual. When you've worked long enough in forward surgical teams, you stop hesitating. That's what you saw tonight. My father nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he was recalculating everything he had said earlier. Around us, whispers resurfaced. She's military medical combat experience, apparently. No wonder she moved so fast. A woman near the bar leaned toward her companion. He called her a nurse. The words traveled softly, but they reached him. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened briefly. He cleared his throat. Well, I'm proud of her. Always have been. The general looked at him not unkindly but with quiet clarity. You should be. The ocean breeze slipped through the open doors again, carrying the faint scent of salt and night air. The sky had darkened to deep blue. Staff began carefully clearing the broken glass near the champagne tower, their movements subdued. The party hadn't resumed. It hovered in an uncertain pause like a performance interrupted mid-act. My father glanced around, aware of the eyes on him. He tried to reclaim control, gesturing lightly. Ladies and gentlemen, everything's under control. Our guest is stable. Please enjoy the evening. A few guests nodded politely, but the energy didn't return. Instead, attention remained on us. The general turned slightly toward me. You're still assigned stateside. For now, sir. Good, we'll talk later. He said it casually, but I recognized the weight behind it. My father noticed too. You two seem to have history, he said carefully. We've met professionally, the general replied. My father smiled faintly, though uncertainty lingered behind it. Well, I appreciate your presence tonight, General. Quite an honor. The general gave a polite nod. I was invited. My father hesitated. Of course, by... The general didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted briefly across the room, then back to my father. Your daughter mentioned the event. My father looked at me surprised. I hadn't told him that. I hadn't told him much about my career at all. I see, he said softly. The silence stretched again. My father shifted his weight, then spoke in a quieter tone meant only for us. You didn't tell me you were working at that level. You didn't ask, I replied gently. He absorbed that without argument. A guest approached hesitantly, an older man with silver hair. Excuse me, he said to me. I just wanted to say, that was remarkable, truly. Thank you. He nodded respectfully, then turned to my father. You must be very proud. My father gave a small smile. Yes, I am. The man moved away. My father exhaled slowly, then looked at me again. There was something different in his eyes now, not just surprise, but recognition forming. He wasn't fully there yet, but the distance between his assumptions and reality had narrowed. The general folded his hands behind his back. You handled the aftermath well too, he said to me quietly. Sir. Staying calm after the pulse returned. Many people rush. You didn't. Training. He nodded, exactly. My father listened, silent. The conversation wasn't dramatic. No revelation yet. Just quiet recalibration. But I could feel the shift deepening. The narrative he had built for the evening, the obedient daughter in a decorative uniform, was dissolving piece by piece. Across the room, the quartet cautiously resumed playing. The notes were softer, tentative. Guests began moving again, though conversations remained subdued. The party continued, but it was no longer my father's performance. The center had moved. He looked at me once more, and this time his voice carried a hint of something almost unfamiliar, respect forming slowly, reluctantly. You stayed very calm, he said. I've had practice. He nodded, absorbing that. Then he glanced at the general again, and something in his expression shifted, anticipation perhaps, or uncertainty, about what else he didn't know. The general spoke quietly but clearly enough. She didn't just learn this in training. My father's eyes lifted. She earned it, the general added. And though the sentence was short, it opened a door my father hadn't expected and wasn't prepared to close. My father stood very still after that. The faint music from the quartet drifted across the room, but it no longer felt like background. It felt like something trying to fill a silence that kept widening. He glanced around at the guests, some watching discreetly, others pretending not to. The evening he had orchestrated so carefully had shifted into unfamiliar territory, and for the first time since I arrived, he didn't seem certain how to steer it back. You earned it, he repeated quietly as if testing the words. The general nodded once. Yes. My father hesitated. She's always been dedicated, he said almost reflexively, even as a child, very disciplined. I didn't correct him. My childhood hadn't exactly been framed that way. Discipline in his house had meant expectations, performance, results. Still, I understood what he was trying to do, reclaim connection even if awkwardly. A server approached with fresh glasses, unsure whether to interrupt. My father waved him off gently. His attention remained fixed on me. I didn't realize you were leading trauma operations, he said. It depends on the rotation, I replied. Sometimes I coordinate, sometimes I assist. The general gave a faint knowing look. She's being modest. My father absorbed that slowly. He looked at my uniform again, not casually this time, but carefully as though noticing details he had overlooked before. The insignia, the precision, the way I carried myself. Guests began drifting closer again, their curiosity no longer subtle. A woman in a navy dress spoke softly to her companion. She brought him back with 2 shocks. I've never seen anything like it, the other replied. My father heard them. I saw the moment register quiet internal. The narrative he had presented earlier was unraveling in front of witnesses he respected. He cleared his throat. You've deployed recently? Yes. Where? I paused briefly. Middle East rotation, then stateside trauma training. He nodded slowly as if each piece required adjustment. That sounds intense. It can be. The general shifted slightly, then spoke in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. Mass casualty drills, real-time surgical coordination, air evacuation decisions. She handles all of it. My father exhaled softly. I see. He didn't actually see, not fully, but he was beginning to understand the scale. The distance between his assumption and reality had grown too large to ignore. Across the room, a few guests began approaching individually, quiet congratulations, respectful nods. None of it was loud, none of it theatrical, but the effect accumulated. You were incredible, one man said. That was extraordinary composure, another added. Saved his life, someone murmured. My father stood beside me listening. Each comment landed differently than applause at a business deal. This wasn't about money, it wasn't about influence, it was about something he couldn't measure. He spoke softly, almost to himself. You didn't even hesitate. I didn't have time to. He nodded, still watching me. The confidence he usually wore like armor had softened into something more reflective. For the first time, he seemed less concerned with how others saw him, and more concerned with how he had seen me. The general looked toward the ocean briefly, then back at us. That's the difference between training and experience, he said. Experience removes doubt. My father absorbed that, then asked quietly, How long has she been doing this? The general answered without hesitation, long enough to trust her instincts. Silence followed again. My father shifted his stance, folding his hands loosely in front of him, a gesture I rarely saw from him. It was less commanding, more contemplative. I suppose, he said slowly, I underestimated the scope of your work? I met his eyes. You focused on other things. He nodded, accepting that. No defensiveness, no argument, just acknowledgement. The quartet's music grew slightly louder, as if sensing permission to resume fully. A few guests returned to quiet conversation, though many still glanced our way. The party was continuing, but it no longer revolved around spectacle. It revolved around something quieter, more human. My father looked at me again, then at the general. Thank you for being here tonight, he said more sincerely now. The general gave a small nod. I'm glad I was. My father hesitated once more, and thank you for clarifying. The general's expression softened slightly. Sometimes clarity helps. He turned toward me. We'll talk later, he repeated quietly. Yes, sir. My father noticed the exchange. He didn't ask questions this time. Instead, he simply watched, absorbing what he still didn't fully understand. A breeze moved through the room again, lifting the edge of the drapes. The last light faded from the horizon. The chandeliers reflected in the glass like floating constellations. My father spoke again, his voice lower than before. I called you a nurse. I didn't respond immediately. He continued almost apologetically. I thought I understood what that meant. I met his gaze. It's not a small role. No, he said quietly, it isn't. He looked around the room at the guests who had watched at the general standing calmly nearby at the space where a man had nearly died. Then he looked back at me. "I think," he said slowly, "I've been seeing only part of who you are." The general watched the exchange without interrupting. And though no dramatic revelation had been spoken yet, the foundation beneath my father's assumptions had already shifted quietly, decisively, preparing him for the truth he still hadn't heard. The party slowly resumed around us, but it no longer felt like the same evening. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. Laughter came in smaller bursts, as though people were aware that something real had happened in a room designed for performance. My father stood beside me, no longer commanding attention, simply present. It was a subtle shift, but to anyone who knew him it was enormous. He glanced toward the entrance where the ambulance had disappeared, then back at me. "Do you get used to that?" he asked. "To what?" "Moments like that, when everything depends on you." I considered the question. "You don't get used to it. You learn to function anyway." He nodded, absorbing that. His eyes drifted briefly to the marble floor where the man had collapsed, now spotless again. The staff had erased the evidence, but the memory lingered. The general stepped closer, his posture, relaxed hands, loosely clasped behind his back. He had the calm presence of someone accustomed to waiting for the right moment. My father noticed, instinctively straightening slightly, though not in his usual assertive way, more like someone preparing to listen. "You handled that situation the way I expected," the general said again, this time more clearly. My father looked at him. "You've said that." "Yes." He paused, then added, "Because I've seen her do it under worse conditions." The words settled heavily. My father's brow creased faintly. "Worse than this?" The general nodded. "Much worse." My father looked at me again, trying to reconcile the image of his daughter in this elegant room with something harsher, unseen. "You never mentioned that." "There wasn't much to say," I replied. The general tilted his head slightly. There was quite a lot to say. My father let out a quiet breath. "I suppose I didn't ask the right questions." The general's gaze softened slightly. "That happens." A pause followed. The quartet shifted to a low, steady piece. Glasses clinked gently in the distance. The ocean wind moved through the open doors again, carrying the scent of salt. My father spoke again, more cautiously now. "General, what exactly is her role?" The general answered without hesitation. "She commands medical response teams during high-risk operations." My father blinked. "Commands?" "Yes." He looked at me, searching for confirmation. I gave a small nod. The word seemed to land differently for him. Command meant authority, responsibility, consequence. It wasn't the image he had held earlier. "She's responsible for triage decisions," the general continued. "Who goes first? Who can wait? Who must be evacuated immediately? Those decisions save lives." My father's face tightened slightly. "That's a lot." "It is." Silence returned, heavier than before. Guests nearby pretended to focus on their conversations, but the circle of attention remained. My father noticed. He always noticed. But instead of reclaiming control, he stayed still. "I thought she assisted," he said quietly. The general shook his head once. "She leads." My father inhaled slowly. His eyes moved over my uniform again, more carefully than ever. The insignia, the posture, the composure, pieces were aligning. "You're in charge," he said almost to himself. "Sometimes," I replied. The general's voice came gently, "More often than she'll admit." My father gave a faint, uncertain smile. "She's always been understated." I didn't answer. It wasn't inaccurate. The general shifted his weight slightly, then added, "Tonight looked simple. It wasn't. Cardiac arrest in a crowded environment, noise, confusion, pressure. She controlled it immediately." My father nodded slowly. "Yes, she did." A guest nearby murmured, "2 shocks. Didn't panic once." Another whispered, "That was leadership." My father heard that word, leadership. It lingered. He turned toward me again. "You didn't even look worried." I was focused. He studied me carefully, as if trying to see the difference. The general spoke quietly. "That's experience, not just training, experience." My father absorbed that again. The shift in him deepened. He wasn't defensive anymore. He wasn't embarrassed. He was learning slowly, reluctantly, but genuinely. "I called you a nurse," he said softly. I met his eyes, yes. I thought it was smaller than this. It isn't. No, he said, it isn't. He glanced at the general again, then back at me. You've done this many times. Yes. How many lives? I paused. I don't count. The general gave a faint nod as if confirming something unspoken. My father exhaled quietly. The number didn't matter. The implication did. The quartet's music swelled slightly. The party continued in the background, but for my father the evening had narrowed to this conversation. He looked at me with a new expression, less certainty, more recognition. I think he said slowly, I've been introducing you incorrectly. The general didn't speak, but I noticed the faintest shift in his posture, approval perhaps. My father straightened slightly, not in dominance, but in clarity. He looked around at the guests nearby, then back at me. I should have said, he continued quietly, that my daughter saves lives. The words hung in the air, simple but heavy. For the first time that evening he wasn't performing. He was understanding. The words seemed to linger even after he finished speaking. My daughter saves lives. It wasn't dramatic, but coming from him it carried more weight than applause. My father had built his identity on numbers, profit margins, valuations, acquisitions. Yet now he stood in a room full of people who had just watched something he couldn't quantify, and he was trying quietly to adjust. He glanced at the general again, as though confirming he had said the right thing. The general gave a small nod, neither congratulating nor correcting, just acknowledging. That seemed to steady him. I should have said that from the beginning, my father added almost to himself. I didn't respond. The moment didn't need commentary, it needed space. Around us, guests resumed cautious conversations. A few drifted closer, offering respectful smiles. The earlier curiosity had transformed into something more deliberate recognition. The staff moved softly, refilling glasses, resetting trays. The music from the quartet settled into a calm, restrained rhythm. My father folded his hands loosely in front of him. You've been doing this for years, haven't you? Yes. And you never corrected me. You seemed certain. He gave a faint, rueful smile. I was. The general spoke quietly. Certainty can be comfortable. My father glanced at him, until it isn't. The general inclined his head slightly. Exactly. Silence followed, not awkward, reflective. My father looked at me again, more directly than before. The distance that had always existed between us, his expectations, my choices, felt smaller now. I'm curious, he said carefully. When you're in those situations, how do you decide who to treat first? The question was genuine, not social, not performative. I answered simply. Who has the best chance if treated immediately? It's about time and survivability. He nodded slowly. So you have to prioritize. Yes. That must be difficult. It can be. The general added, it requires clarity under pressure. Not everyone can do it. My father absorbed that. His gaze drifted briefly across the room, perhaps imagining environments far removed from chandeliers and marble floors. I've spent my life making decisions about money, he said quietly. You make decisions about people. I didn't correct him. The distinction was clear enough. A guest approached the same silver-haired man from earlier. I just heard he regained full consciousness in the ambulance, he said softly. They said your quick response made the difference. That's good to hear, I replied. He turned to my father. You raised someone remarkable. My father didn't deflect this time. He nodded once. She chose her own path. The man smiled, then moved away. My father watched him go, thoughtful. The general shifted slightly, then spoke in a calm, measured tone. You handled the scene exactly the way we teach our senior officers. My father looked up. Senior officers. The general met his gaze. Yes. The word seemed to land with particular emphasis. My father glanced at my shoulders again, as though the insignia had changed shape. I suppose, he said slowly, I should learn more about what those mean. I offered a small smile. You can. He nodded. I'd like that. The quartet's music softened again, blending with the distant sound of waves. The evening, though still elegant, had shifted into something more grounded. The spectacle had faded. What remained was quieter, more honest. My father took a breath. I built tonight to impress people, he admitted softly. But what they'll remember isn't the party. No, I agreed. He looked around the room at the guests who still glanced toward us at the place where the man had collapsed at the general standing calmly nearby. "They'll remember you," he said. I didn't respond. Recognition wasn't why I had stepped forward. But I understood what he meant. The general spoke again, his tone even. Moments like that change perspective. My father nodded. "Yes, they do." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I think mine just changed." The wind moved through the open doors again, lifting the edge of the curtains. The chandeliers reflected in the glass like distant stars. The room felt calmer now, almost contemplative. My father looked at me once more, and this time the expression in his eyes was unmistakable respect fully formed. "I'm glad you came tonight," he said. "So am I." He gave a small nod. "Otherwise, I might never have understood." The general watched the exchange silently. No further explanation was needed. The shift had completed itself not through confrontation, not through humiliation, but through competence and truth. And though the evening still held one final revelation waiting to surface, my father had already crossed the threshold from certainty to understanding, from assumption to respect. The general remained beside us, his posture relaxed, but there was a quiet deliberateness in the way he hadn't left. My father noticed it too. In his world, people of influence rarely lingered without purpose. The realization made him attentive in a different way, less as a host, more as someone waiting for the next piece of information. "You mentioned senior officers," my father said carefully. "I'm not very familiar with military structure." "That's understandable," the general replied calmly. My father hesitated, then gestured subtly toward my shoulders. "Her insignia, I assume that indicates rank." "Yes." "And?" The general didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me silently, asking permission. I gave a small nod. There was no reason to avoid it anymore. The evening had already shifted beyond pretense. "She's not just part of the medical corps," the general said. "She leads it in her operational unit." My father absorbed that, but he was still translating the meaning. "So, she supervises a team." "Yes." "How large?" "Depends on the deployment, sometimes a dozen, sometimes more." My father nodded slowly, but he still hadn't reached the conclusion. He looked at my shoulders again, studying the insignia carefully, as though trying to decode a language he had ignored for years. "I should have asked earlier," he murmured. The general's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "It's never too late." A few nearby guests leaned closer, sensing something unfolding. The room remained quiet enough that every word carried. My father cleared his throat. "What rank does she hold?" The general answered simply, "Colonel." The word landed with a weight that seemed to press the air flat. My father blinked once, then again. "Colonel." "Yes." He looked at me, searching my face as if expecting correction. I didn't offer any. The truth settled on its own. "You're a colonel," he repeated, the syllables slow. "Yes." He exhaled softly, almost like someone absorbing unexpected altitude. Around us, whispers moved again. "Colonel, did he say, Colonel? That's senior command?" My father's posture shifted subtly. He straightened not from pride but from realization. The image he had constructed earlier, just a nurse, collapsed completely. The general continued, still calm. "She oversees medical readiness for multiple operational groups." My father's voice dropped. "I didn't know." "I know," the general replied. He paused, then added, "Most people don't see what happens behind those uniforms." My father looked at me again, and this time there was no confusion left, only clarity mixed with something deeper, something almost humbled. "I introduced you incorrectly," he said quietly. I shook my head slightly. "You introduced what you thought you knew." He nodded, accepting that. The general spoke again, his tone matter-of-fact but deliberate. "When I said I expected her to handle that situation, this is why." My father glanced at him. "Because she's commanded in real emergencies." "Yes." "And tonight, she did the same." "Yes." The simplicity of the exchange made the truth impossible to ignore. A guest nearby murmured softly, "He told her to serve drinks." Another voice replied, "She's a colonel." My father heard it. He didn't react defensively. Instead, he absorbed it quietly, as though letting the contrast settle fully. He looked at me once more. "How long?" "Several years." "And you never mentioned it." "It didn't change who I am." He nodded slowly. "No, but it changes how I see you." The general's expression softened slightly. He spoke with quiet respect. "She's one of the most capable medical officers I've worked with." My father turned toward him. "You mean that?" "Yes." The certainty in the general's voice left no room for doubt. My father inhaled slowly. His eyes moved across the room at the guests at the place where a man had nearly died at the uniform he had dismissed. Then he looked back at me. "I called you just a nurse," he said softly. I didn't answer. He continued, "You're a colonel who just saved a life in my living room." "Yes." He nodded once firmly as if sealing the understanding. For a moment none of us spoke. The quartet's music filled the silence. The ocean wind brushed softly through the doors. The party continued, but its meaning had changed entirely. My father finally spoke again, his voice steady, sincere. "I think tonight I learned something I should have known long ago." The general watched quietly. My father met my eyes. "You didn't choose a smaller path," he said. "You chose a harder one." I gave a small nod. "And you mastered it." The respect in his voice was no longer tentative. It was complete. For a moment the three of us simply stood there while the party moved carefully around us. My father's gaze lingered on my shoulders, as if the insignia had become something entirely new to him. The word colonel seemed to echo silently in his mind, reshaping years of assumptions in seconds. He looked older suddenly, not physically, but in the way realization can add weight to a person. "I should have known," he said quietly. The general shook his head. "Rank doesn't always tell the whole story." My father looked at him. "It tells enough." The general gave a faint smile. "Sometimes, but in her case it still doesn't explain everything." My father frowned slightly, trying to follow. "What do you mean?" The general didn't answer immediately. He studied me for a second, then turned back to my father. "You asked earlier how she makes those decisions." "Yes. She's made them under fire, with helicopters waiting, with multiple casualties arriving at once, with seconds to choose." My father's jaw tightened slightly. "You're saying she's done this repeatedly?" "Yes." The general's tone remained calm, but every word added another layer. "She's coordinated field triage during active operations. She's supervised surgical stabilization before evacuation. She's trained teams who now lead their own units." My father listened without interrupting. The shift in him deepened further, not shock now, but comprehension forming piece by piece. And tonight the general continued, "She did exactly the same thing. Assess, decide, act, no hesitation." My father nodded slowly. I saw that. "Yes." Silence followed, not heavy settling. The truth no longer needed dramatic emphasis. It had already taken root. My father exhaled quietly. "I built this night to show success," he said, glancing around the room. "But the only thing anyone will remember is her." The general replied gently, "That's not a bad outcome." "No," my father admitted, "it isn't." He looked at me again, and the expression in his eyes held something unmistakable pride, but also humility. A rare combination for him. "I underestimated you," he said plainly. "I know. I shouldn't have." "No," I agreed softly. He nodded once, accepting it without defensiveness. That alone felt like the final shift. The quartet's music swelled slightly as the evening regained rhythm. Guests began speaking more freely again, though many still glanced toward us with quiet respect. The earlier spectacle had transformed into something calmer, more meaningful. The general folded his hands behind his back. "I was planning to speak with her tonight," he said. My father looked up. "About what?" "A promotion." My father blinked. "Another one." "Yes." He turned toward me, surprise returning, but in a different form. "You're being promoted." "It's under consideration," I replied. The general added, "We're expanding operational oversight. She's one of the candidates." My father let out a slow breath as if absorbing the scale. "So, more responsibility." "Yes." He nodded, thoughtful. "You keep moving upward." "I keep working." The general gave a faint approving look. "That's why." My father glanced around the room again at the guests who had witnessed everything at the setting he had created, at the contrast between his assumptions and reality. Then he looked back at me. "I told everyone you could serve drinks," he said quietly. I didn't respond. He continued, voice steady. "Instead, you saved a life. and I learned who you really are." The general remained silent, allowing the moment to settle. My father took a small breath. "If anyone asks me now," he added, "I'll tell them my daughter leads under pressure, that she makes decisions that matter, that she's earned every bit of that uniform." I met his eyes. "That's enough." He nodded. "It should have been said long ago." The wind moved softly through the open doors. The ocean shimmered in darkness, now reflecting scattered lights from the estate. The party once designed to celebrate wealth had become something else entirely, a quiet recognition of purpose. My father straightened slightly, then spoke in a tone that carried sincerity rather than performance. "I'm proud of you." The words were simple, but they landed deeper than anything else he had said. "Thank you," I replied. He gave a small nod as if something inside him had settled. The distance between us, built over years of misunderstanding, had narrowed in a single evening, not through argument, but through truth revealed in action. The general looked at both of us, then gave a final calm acknowledgement. "You should be." The music continued. Conversations resumed. The evening moved forward. But the meaning of the night had already been decided. My father's $3 million party would be remembered for something he never planned the moment he realized his daughter wasn't just part of the military. She was the one people relied on when everything else stopped. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been underestimated by someone close to you only for the truth to reveal itself in a single moment? Share your perspective in the comments below. Your stories matter, and they often inspire others more than you realize. And if you enjoy meaningful stories like this, quiet strength, family reconciliation, and unexpected respect, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. There's always another journey waiting, and I'm grateful you chose to be part of this one.